The camera in my hands felt heavier than usual as I watched my ex-husband Ryan Carter spin another woman across the dance floor at my best friend's wedding. For 3 years, I'd convinced myself I was over him, over us, over the devastating way our marriage had crumbled. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But seeing him there, laughing with such genuine joy as he dipped his dance partner, sent an unexpected pang through my chest. Then she turned toward the light, and I saw her face clearly through my telephoto lens. My blood turned to ice. The woman in his arms wasn't just any wedding guest. She was wearing my grandmother's emerald necklace, the one Ryan had claimed was stolen during our divorce proceedings, the one that had belonged to my family for 4 generations. The one I'd been told was gone forever. My name is Natalie Brooks, and 3 days ago I thought I was attending the wedding of my closest friend as her photographer and emotional support system. I had no idea I was walking into a carefully orchestrated revelation that would expose a web of lies spanning the past 3 years of my life. What started as a simple favor for Chloe Harper's dream wedding at the Grand Pacific Hotel in Monterey turned into the moment I discovered that everything I believed about my divorce, my ex-husband, and even my best friend, had been built on deception. I've been a luxury wedding photographer for 8 years, building my business from the ground up after graduating from art school in Portland. My specialty is capturing those fleeting moments of pure emotion that couples treasure forever. The stolen glances, the tears of joy, the quiet exchanges between families. I've photographed weddings from Seattle to San Francisco, but I'd never been as personally invested in a celebration as I was in Chloe's wedding weekend. She'd been my roommate in college, my maid of honor when I married Ryan, and my strongest supporter when everything fell apart. When she asked me to photograph her wedding to Marcus Webb, a successful vineyard owner she'd met through her work in wine marketing, I couldn't have been more honored. The Grand Pacific Hotel sits majestically on the cliffs overlooking Carmel Bay, its Spanish colonial architecture perfectly complementing the dramatic California coastline. Chloe had chosen the venue for its combination of elegance and natural beauty, planning an outdoor ceremony in the oceanfront gardens followed by a reception in the Crystal Ballroom. As I arrived on Thursday afternoon for the weekend celebration, the May sunshine painted everything in golden light, and the scent of eucalyptus and sea air created the perfect romantic atmosphere. I'd spent weeks preparing for this wedding, not just professionally but emotionally. This was my first major social event since my divorce was finalized, and I knew there would be questions, sympathetic looks, and well-meaning but painful conversations about my failed marriage. What I hadn't expected was that Ryan would be there. Chloe had mentioned inviting a few people from our college group, but she'd assured me that Ryan wouldn't be attending. She knew how complicated things had been between us, how ugly the divorce had gotten, and how much I needed this weekend to be about celebrating her happiness rather than confronting my past. The divorce had been brutal in ways that went far beyond the typical division of assets and hurt feelings. Ryan and I had been together for 6 years, married for 4, and what I thought was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams had revealed itself to be something much darker. He was a tech entrepreneur who'd launched several successful startups, and I'd supported his career moves even when they required relocating or put strain on my own business. When he started his real estate investment company, I'd even contributed my savings to help with the initial capital, trusting in our shared future. The end came suddenly and viciously. Ryan announced he wanted a divorce just weeks after I'd miscarried what would have been our first child. I was still grieving, still processing the loss, when he moved out and immediately hired an aggressive attorney. What followed was 8 months of legal warfare that drained my finances and my faith in human decency. Ryan claimed that my business was failing, that I was emotionally unstable, and that I had hidden assets. His legal team painted me as a vindictive ex-wife trying to claim more than I deserved. The most devastating blow came when he reported that my grandmother's emerald necklace, along with several other pieces of family jewelry, had been stolen from our shared safety deposit box. The necklace wasn't just valuable monetarily, it had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family, each one adding their own story to its legacy. My great-great-grandmother had worn it on her wedding day in 1898. My great-grandmother had hidden it during the Depression. My grandmother had treasured it through World War II, and my mother had given it to me on my 18th birthday with tears in her eyes. When Ryan's attorney presented the police report claiming the jewelry had been stolen, I felt like a piece of my family's soul had been ripped away. The investigation went nowhere. No evidence of forced entry, no suspects, no leads. The insurance company eventually paid out, but no amount of money could replace the sentimental value of those pieces. I suspected Ryan had taken them, but I couldn't prove it, and my lawyer advised me to focus on assets I could actually recover. By the time our divorce was finalized, I was emotionally exhausted, financially drained, and ready to rebuild my life without any connection to the man I'd once loved completely. Moving forward hadn't been easy, but I'd thrown myself into my work with renewed passion. My photography business flourished as I channeled my emotional intensity into capturing the love and commitment I'd once believed in for myself. I moved from our shared condo in San Diego back to Portland, where I'd gone to school and still had friends who knew me before Ryan. Slowly, I began to heal. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious had developed. I focused on my health, my friendships, and building the kind of independent life I should have maintained during my marriage. Chloe had been my anchor through all of it. She'd flown to Portland twice during the worst parts of the divorce proceedings, bringing wine and tissues and letting me cry on her shoulder for hours. She'd helped me pack up my life in San Diego, driving the moving truck behind my car as I made the journey north to start over. When I questioned whether I was being paranoid about Ryan's behavior, she'd validated my feelings. When I doubted my ability to rebuild my business and my life, she'd reminded me of my strength. Her friendship had been one of the few constants in my world during a time when everything else was shifting. So when she called me in March, 6 weeks before her wedding, with excitement bubbling in her voice as she described her vision for the perfect celebration, I was thrilled to be part of it. Marcus seemed like everything Ryan hadn't been: supportive of her career, emotionally available, and genuinely interested in building a partnership rather than just finding someone to support his ambitions. Their love story had begun 2 years earlier, when Chloe's marketing firm was hired to rebrand Marcus's family vineyard. What started as a professional relationship had blossomed into something beautiful, and I was genuinely happy for my friend. The wedding weekend was planned as a 3-day celebration, starting with a welcome dinner on Friday night, followed by the ceremony and reception on Saturday, and concluding with a farewell brunch on Sunday. As the photographer, I would be documenting everything from the behind-the-scenes preparation shots to the final farewell moments. Chloe had given me complete creative control, trusting my artistic vision to capture her wedding in a way that would tell their love story for decades to come. Thursday evening, as I unpacked my camera equipment in my ocean view room at the Grand Pacific, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below, the soft lighting of the hotel's elegant interior, and the anticipation of photographing a wedding where I knew the couple was genuinely perfect for each other, all combined to create a feeling of hope. Maybe this weekend would mark a turning point for me, a moment when I could finally put the past behind me and embrace the possibility of love again, even if it was just witnessing it through my camera lens. Friday morning brought perfect weather and the arrival of wedding guests from across the country. I spent the day photographing candid moments as people checked in, reunited with old friends, and explored the stunning hotel grounds. Chloe was radiant during our morning photo session, her excitement infectious as we captured portraits in the gardens where she would say her vows the next day. Marcus joined us for couples shots, and I could see through my viewfinder why Chloe had fallen for him. The way he looked at her, the gentle way he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the genuine laughter they shared. It all spoke to a deep connection that made my photographer's heart happy. The welcome dinner was held on the hotel's terrace restaurant, with round tables scattered across the space to encourage mingling among guests who hadn't seen each other in years. I moved quietly around the perimeter, capturing the joy of reunion and the excitement building toward the next day's ceremony. The guest list was an eclectic mix of Chloe's college friends, her colleagues from the wine industry, Marcus's family and friends from the vineyard community, and various relatives from both sides. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there, and the atmosphere was relaxed and celebratory. I was photographing the toasts when I first noticed him across the terrace. At first, it was just a familiar silhouette that made me pause, a way of holding his shoulders that triggered a memory I couldn't quite place. Then he turned slightly, and I saw Ryan's profile illuminated by the string lights overhead. My hands tightened involuntarily around my camera, and I had to remind myself to breathe. He was supposed to be in San Diego. He was supposed to be absent from this celebration that represented my return to social events as a newly single woman. He was supposed to be part of my past, not standing 30 feet away looking relaxed and happy at my best friend's wedding. My immediate instinct was to approach Chloe and ask what he was doing there, but she was in the middle of an animated conversation with Marcus's grandmother, and I didn't want to disrupt her evening with my shock and confusion. Instead, I continued photographing, using my telephoto lens to keep my distance while trying to process why Ryan would be at this wedding and why Chloe hadn't mentioned his attendance. Perhaps it had been a last-minute addition to the guest list. Perhaps she'd been trying to protect me from the stress of knowing he'd be there. Perhaps there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make sense once I had a chance to talk to her privately. As the evening progressed, I watched Ryan interact with other guests, many of whom I recognized from our college days. He seemed comfortable and familiar with everyone, not like a last-minute addition, but like someone who'd been part of the celebration plans all along. He was seated at a table with people I knew well, including our former roommate Derek and his wife, who'd been close friends with both Ryan and me during our marriage. The easy way he fit into the social dynamics suggested this wasn't a surprise invitation. What disturbed me more than his presence was how good he looked. Marriage and divorce had aged me, adding lines around my eyes and a permanent tension in my shoulders that I was still learning to release. But Ryan appeared refreshed and confident, his dark hair perfectly styled, his
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
expensive suit fitting him like it was custom-made. He'd always been handsome, but there was a new energy about him that suggested his life had improved considerably since our divorce. While I'd been struggling to rebuild my business and my sense of self, he seemed to have flourished. I managed to avoid any direct interaction during the dinner, staying busy with my camera and using my professional obligations as a shield. When guests began to filter back to their rooms around 11, I finally had a moment alone with Chloe as she was saying goodbye to her parents. "Beautiful evening," I said, reviewing some of the shots on my camera's display screen. "Everyone seems so happy to be here." "It's been perfect," she agreed, then hesitated before adding, "Natalie, I should probably mention that Ryan ended up being able to make it after all. I know I said he wouldn't be here, but Marcus's cousin had to cancel last minute, and Ryan was available. I hope that's okay." The casual way she delivered this information felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this explanation all evening. "Of course it's okay," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's your wedding. You should have whoever you want here." "I just didn't want you to be caught off guard," she continued. "I know things ended badly between you two, but it's been 3 years. I thought maybe enough time had passed." "Absolutely," I assured her, though my stomach was churning. "I'm here to photograph your wedding, not worry about ancient history." Chloe hugged me goodnight, and I returned to my room feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just Ryan's presence that bothered me, though that was certainly uncomfortable enough. It was the feeling that something about Chloe's explanation didn't ring true. The timing felt too convenient, and her manner too carefully casual. But I pushed those thoughts aside, telling myself I was overthinking the situation because of my own emotional baggage. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, with a gentle ocean breeze that would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony. I arrived early to photograph the preparation process, starting with detail shots of Chloe's dress, shoes, and jewelry laid out in her bridal suite. Her mother Patricia and her sister were helping with hair and makeup, while the bridesmaids chatted and sipped champagne. The atmosphere was joyful and relaxed, exactly what a bride deserves on her wedding morning. I spent 2 hours capturing the getting ready process, from the careful application of Chloe's makeup to the moment her mother fastened the pearl necklace that had been her something borrowed. These intimate moments before the ceremony were always my favorite to photograph, because they revealed the genuine emotions beneath the formal celebration. Chloe was radiant, her happiness authentic and infectious. Whatever concerns I'd had about Ryan's presence seemed petty in the face of her obvious joy. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the oceanfront gardens, with the reception to follow immediately in the crystal ballroom. As guests began arriving and taking their seats, I positioned myself to capture both the processional and the couple's exchange of vows. The setting was breathtaking, with the Pacific Ocean providing a dramatic backdrop and the late afternoon light creating a golden glow over everything. I was adjusting my camera settings when I spotted Ryan among the arriving guests. He wasn't alone. A stunning brunette in an elegant navy dress walked beside him, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. She was tall and graceful, with the kind of effortless beauty that suggested good breeding and expensive maintenance. As they found their seats, I could see other guests greeting her warmly, as if she was already known to this social circle. The way Ryan introduced her to people suggested this wasn't a casual date, but a significant relationship. The ceremony itself was beautiful and emotional. Marcus's voice cracked slightly as he recited his vows, and Chloe's eyes filled with tears of joy as she promised to love him for the rest of their lives. I moved quietly around the perimeter of the seating area, capturing the couple's emotions as well as the reactions of their loved ones. Through my telephoto lens, I could see Ryan and his companion in the third row, both seeming genuinely moved by the celebration of love unfolding before them. As the newly married couple kissed and guests erupted in applause, I felt a professional satisfaction at having documented such a perfect moment. Whatever personal complications Ryan's presence might create, I had done my job well. The images I'd captured would allow Chloe and Marcus to relive this day for the rest of their lives, and that was what mattered most. The cocktail hour took place on the hotel's terrace, while the ballroom was transformed for dinner and dancing. I circulated among the guests, photographing candid moments of celebration and reunion. The champagne flowed freely, and the mood was jubilant as people congratulated the couple and caught up with old friends. I was particularly focused on capturing the interactions between Chloe and Marcus's families, documenting the blending of two social circles into one extended celebration. It was during this relaxed hour that I first got a clear look at Ryan's companion. She was even more striking up close, with dark hair swept into an elegant updo and makeup that enhanced her natural beauty without appearing overdone. Her dress was clearly expensive, the kind of understated elegance that only came from high-end designers. But it was her jewelry that caught my attention and made my breath catch in my throat. Around her neck was a delicate emerald necklace that looked remarkably similar to my grandmother's stolen piece. From across the terrace, I couldn't be certain, but the setting and the particular shade of the stones seemed familiar in a way that made my hands shake slightly as I adjusted my camera lens for a closer look. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief and anger were making me see connections that didn't exist. Emerald necklaces weren't exactly rare, and plenty of women owned vintage jewelry that might resemble my family's heirloom. But as the evening progressed and I continued to observe Ryan and his companion, other details began to bother me. She was wearing what appeared to be a vintage diamond bracelet on her left wrist, delicate and intricate in a way that reminded me of my great-grandmother's Art Deco pieces. Her earrings, barely visible beneath her upswept hair, seemed to catch the light in a pattern I recognized. By the time guests moved into the ballroom for dinner, I was fighting a growing certainty that this woman was wearing my stolen family jewelry. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant celebration space, with round tables draped in ivory linens and centerpieces of white roses and greenery. Candles flickered throughout the room, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the grand scale of the space. I moved between tables during dinner, capturing the laughter and conversation that flowed as freely as the wine from Marcus's vineyard. Ryan and his companion were seated at a table with several college friends, including people who had been at my wedding and knew the significance of my family's jewelry. As I photographed their table during the salad course, I heard fragments of conversation that made my pulse quicken. Someone was complimenting the woman on her beautiful necklace, and she was explaining that it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. The casual way she claimed ownership of what I knew was my grandmother's necklace sent a surge of anger through me that I had to work hard to conceal. I excused myself from the ballroom and stepped onto the terrace for air, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the images on my camera's display screen. Using the zoom function, I could examine the jewelry more closely in the photographs I'd taken. There was no doubt in my mind now. The necklace, the bracelet, even the pearl and diamond earrings she was wearing, they were all pieces from my family's collection. Pieces that Ryan had claimed were stolen during our divorce proceedings. Pieces that had been reported to police and insurance companies as lost forever. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ryan hadn't just divorced me and moved on with his life. He had stolen my family's most precious heirlooms and given them to his new girlfriend. He had filed false police reports, committed insurance fraud, and let me grieve the loss of irreplaceable family treasures while he was decorating another woman with them. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I had to grip the terrace railing to steady myself. As I stood there processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered, I heard footsteps behind me. Chloe appeared in the doorway, still glowing from her wedding day but with a concerned expression on her face. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, approaching with the careful steps of someone wearing an elaborate wedding dress. "You looked a little pale when you stepped out." I turned to face my best friend, the woman who had supported me through the darkest period of my life, and felt a question forming that I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. "Chloe, how long have Ryan and Tessa been together?" Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something that might have been guilt crossing her features before she composed herself. "I'm not really sure," she said, but her tone was different now, more careful. "Why do you ask?" "She's wearing my grandmother's necklace," I said quietly, watching Chloe's face for any sign of recognition or surprise. What I saw instead was a woman who already knew exactly what I was talking about, and in that moment I realized that my best friend's betrayal might run even deeper than my ex-husband's. The silence stretched between us as Chloe and I stood on the terrace, the sound of waves crashing below mixing with the distant laughter from the ballroom. Her hesitation spoke volumes, and I could see her mind working, calculating how much she could reveal without exposing whatever role she'd played in this deception. "Natalie, I think you might be mistaken," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Lots of vintage jewelry looks similar. You're probably just emotional seeing Ryan again." The dismissive tone was so unlike the supportive friend who had held me while I cried over those lost family treasures that I actually took a step back. This was the same woman who had helped me search through every box and drawer in my old house, looking for any piece of jewelry we might have missed when cataloging what was stolen. She had seen my grandmother's necklace countless times, had even borrowed my mother's matching bracelet for her college graduation. There was no way she wouldn't recognize those pieces. "Show me the photos," she said, extending her hand toward my camera with what seemed like forced casualness. "I'm sure once we look closer, you'll see it's not the same necklace." I pulled my camera closer to my chest instinctively. Something in her eagerness to see the images, combined with her immediate dismissal of my concerns, triggered every warning instinct I'd learned to trust during my divorce proceedings. Instead of showing her the photographs, I found myself studying her face in the soft light from the ballroom windows, looking for tells I'd somehow missed in our years of friendship. "You knew," I said quietly, the realization hitting me with crystalline clarity. "You knew she was wearing my jewelry, and you knew I'd see her tonight." Chloe's composure cracked just slightly, her carefully maintained wedding day serenity slipping for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my wedding day, Natalie. Can we please not create drama over a necklace that probably came from some department store?" But I was already remembering other moments from the evening that hadn't made sense at the time. The way several college friends had greeted me with slightly awkward expressions, as if they knew something I didn't. The careful way people had avoided mentioning Ryan in conversation, even though his presence was obvious. Most tellingly, the way Chloe had positioned me for photographs throughout the evening, always keeping me at angles where I wouldn't have a clear view of his table until the dancing began. "How long have you known about Tessa?" I asked, using the name I'd overheard during dinner conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Chloe replied, but she was already moving toward the ballroom entrance. I need to get back to my guests. We can discuss this tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly. I followed her back into the reception, but instead of returning to my photography duties, I found myself observing the social dynamics with new eyes. Now that I was looking for it, I could see the careful choreography that had kept Ryan and me from crossing paths all evening. When he moved toward the bar, someone would engage me in conversation on the opposite side of the room. When I needed to photograph his section of the dance floor, Chloe would suddenly need pictures taken elsewhere. It was subtle but systematic, the kind of coordination that required advanced planning and multiple participants. The band had set up during dinner, and as the first dance began, I positioned myself to capture Chloe and Marcus's romantic moment. They moved together beautifully, clearly having practiced, and the love between them was genuinely touching, despite my growing disillusionment with my best friend's honesty. Whatever Chloe was hiding about Ryan and Tessa, her feelings for her new husband appeared authentic. As more couples joined them on the dance floor, I continued photographing while keeping one eye on Ryan and his companion. They danced well together, with the comfortable rhythm of a couple who had been together for a significant amount of time. Not the tentative movements of a new relationship, but the easy intimacy that develops over months or years. Every piece of evidence suggested this wasn't a recent romance that had happened to coincide with my stolen jewelry appearing on the market. During a slower song, I managed to position myself close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. Tessa was admiring the ballroom's crystal chandeliers and commenting on the quality of the champagne. Her voice had the polished accent of someone from an affluent background, but there was something studied about it, as if she'd worked to refine her natural speech patterns. When Ryan spun her gently, she laughed with genuine delight, and I could see why he was attracted to her. She was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, brunette where I was blonde, sophisticated where I was more naturally expressive. But she was also wearing jewelry that had been stolen from me, and the longer I watched her casual enjoyment of my family's treasures, the angrier I became. These weren't just expensive accessories to me, they were connections to women I'd never met but whose strength had shaped my own identity. My great-great-grandmother had worn that necklace when she said goodbye to her husband as he left for the Spanish-American War, not knowing if he'd return. My great-grandmother had sewn the pearls into her coat lining when the family fled Hungary during World War I, carrying them across an ocean to start a new life. Each piece held stories of love, loss, courage, and survival that meant more to me than any monetary value. As the evening progressed, I found myself documenting not just the wedding celebration, but evidence of my own betrayal. I photographed Tessa from multiple angles, ensuring I captured clear images of every piece of jewelry she was wearing. I noted the people she interacted with, looking for anyone else who might be complicit in whatever scheme had brought my family's heirlooms to this wedding. Most importantly, I began to piece together the timeline of deception that had led to this moment. The more I observed, the more I realized how carefully orchestrated this entire situation was. Ryan's last-minute invitation to the wedding wasn't coincidental. The seating arrangements that kept us separated weren't random. Even Chloe's initial assurance that Ryan wouldn't be attending, followed by her casual mention of his surprise availability, felt rehearsed. Someone had wanted me to see Tessa wearing my jewelry, but in a controlled environment where any confrontation would be socially awkward and easily dismissed. During the bouquet toss, I noticed Derek Stone, Ryan's business partner and former friend from our college days, watching me with particular interest. Derek had been at our wedding, had been a regular guest at dinner parties during our marriage, and had testified character witness for Ryan during our divorce proceedings. He'd painted me as emotionally unstable and vindictive, supporting Ryan's narrative that I was trying to claim assets I wasn't entitled to. Seeing him now, observing my reaction to Tessa's jewelry, I wondered if he'd known all along where those missing pieces had gone. I approached Derek during a break between songs, my camera ready as an excuse for conversation. "Great to see you again," I said with forced warmth. "It's been, 3 years since the divorce was finalized?" "Something like that," he replied, his expression guarded. "You look well, Natalie. Photography business still keeping you busy?" "Busier than ever," I assured him. It's amazing how much my work improved once I wasn't distracted by a failing marriage. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find your true potential. Derek shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward where Ryan and Tessa were chatting with other guests. I'm glad things worked out for you. Oh, they definitely have, I continued, adjusting my camera settings while keeping my tone conversational. The insurance settlement from the stolen jewelry helped me upgrade all my equipment. It's funny how something so devastating at the time can turn into an unexpected blessing. His reaction was immediate and telling. Derek's face went pale and he actually took a step backward, as if I'd physically threatened him. Insurance settlement? He repeated weakly. From the jewelry that was stolen from our safety deposit box, I clarified, watching his expression carefully. You remember, right? My grandmother's emerald necklace. My great-grandmother's Art Deco pieces. Ryan was so devastated when they disappeared. We filed police reports, insurance claims, the whole nightmare process. Derek mumbled something about needing another drink and escaped toward the bar with obvious relief. His reaction confirmed what I'd already suspected, but hadn't wanted to believe. The theft of my jewelry hadn't been random criminal activity. It had been deliberate, planned, and executed by people I'd trusted, people who were now watching my discovery of their deception, with varying degrees of guilt and fear. I spent the rest of the reception documenting everything while maintaining my professional facade. To casual observers, I was simply doing my job, capturing the joy and celebration of Chloe's wedding day. But with each photograph, each overheard conversation, each revealing interaction, I was building a comprehensive record of the conspiracy that had robbed me of both my treasured family heirlooms and my faith in the people closest to me. The final dance of the evening was announced around midnight, and couples gathered on the floor for one last romantic moment before the celebration concluded. I positioned myself to capture the scene, noting how many of the relationships around me represented years of shared history and mutual trust. The contrast with my own situation was stark. While these couples danced to promises of enduring love, I was surrounded by people who had systematically lied to and betrayed me for years. As Chloe and Marcus swayed together in the center of the dance floor, I couldn't help but wonder if her marriage would be built on the same foundation of deception that had characterized her friendship with me. Marcus seemed genuinely devoted to her, but he was also entering a family that included people capable of elaborate fraud and emotional manipulation. Did he know what kind of woman he was marrying? Or was he as naive as I had been about the people I'd trusted most? The last song ended, and guests began the slow process of saying goodbyes and collecting personal items. I continued photographing these final moments, though my heart was no longer in the romantic narrative I was supposed to be documenting. Instead, I found myself capturing evidence, preserving details that might be important later when I decided how to respond to what I'd discovered. Ryan and Tessa were among the first to leave, and I made sure to photograph their departure. As they waited for the valet to bring their car, I noticed Ryan checking his phone repeatedly, his expression tense, despite the evening's apparent success. Tessa stood beside him, still radiant in my stolen jewelry, chatting with other departing guests about what a beautiful celebration it had been. The casual way she wore my family's treasures, as if they were just pretty accessories rather than irreplaceable pieces of history, made my chest tight with suppressed fury. From across the lobby, I could see them through my telephoto lens as they climbed into a black Tesla with California plates. Even from a distance, I could tell it was an expensive model, the kind of car that suggested Ryan's business ventures were more successful than he'd claimed during our divorce proceedings. Another lie in an ever-growing collection of deceptions I was uncovering. As their car pulled away from the hotel, I felt a strange mixture of rage and relief. The initial shock of seeing my stolen jewelry was giving way to a cold, calculating anger that reminded me of the emotions I'd felt during the worst parts of my divorce. But this time, I wasn't the naive wife being manipulated by superior legal representation and financial resources. This time, I had evidence, experience, and most importantly, nothing left to lose. Chloe found me in the lobby after the last guests had departed, her wedding dress carefully bustled to prevent damage as she moved through the hotel. Her earlier discomfort with my accusations had been replaced by what seemed like genuine concern, though I was no longer sure I could trust my reading of her expressions. "Thank you so much for everything tonight," she said, embracing me carefully to avoid crushing her gown. "The photographs are going to be incredible, I can already tell." "I'm glad you're happy with them," I replied, my professional mask firmly in place. "You looked absolutely beautiful, and Marcus seems like a wonderful man." "He really is," she agreed, then hesitated before adding, "I hope seeing Ryan wasn't too difficult for you. I know I should have given you more warning, but everything happened so last minute." I studied her face in the hotel's elegant lighting, looking for any sign of the friend who had supported me through my darkest days. What I saw instead was a woman who was skilled at saying the right words while revealing nothing of her true thoughts or motivations. "It was fine," I assured her. "Ancient history, like you said. Although I have to admit his girlfriend's jewelry collection is quite impressive. Some really stunning vintage pieces." Chloe's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "Tessa does have excellent taste. I think she mentioned that necklace was a family heirloom." "How interesting," I replied evenly. "I'd love to hear more about her family's history sometime. Vintage jewelry always has such fascinating stories behind it." "I'm sure she'd be happy to share," Chloe said, though her tone suggested exactly the opposite. "Well, I should get upstairs. Tomorrow's going to be another long day with the farewell brunch." We said our goodnights, and I returned to my room with my camera equipment and a head full of questions that demanded answers. As I connected my cameras to my laptop and began uploading the evening's photographs, I found myself studying each image of Tessa with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. The high-resolution images revealed details I hadn't been able to see clearly during the reception. The emerald necklace wasn't just similar to my grandmother's piece. It was identical down to the specific pattern of the gold filigree setting. The Art Deco bracelet showed the same tiny imperfection in one of the diamonds that I remembered from childhood, when I'd been allowed to hold it carefully while my mother told me stories about my great-grandmother's life in New York during the 1920s. Even the pearl and diamond earrings, barely visible in most shots, showed the characteristic irregular shape of natural pearls that had been passed down through generations rather than purchased from a modern retailer. But beyond the jewelry, the photographs revealed something else that chilled me even more than the theft itself. In several candid shots, I could see Ryan and Tessa interacting with other wedding guests in ways that suggested long-standing relationships. They weren't strangers being introduced to Chloe's social circle. They were established members of it. Derek and his wife greeted Tessa with the familiarity of people who had known her for years. Other college friends hugged her warmly and asked about mutual acquaintances. Most damning of all, in one photograph taken during the cocktail hour, I could see Chloe and Tessa engaged in animated conversation, both laughing with the easy intimacy of genuine friendship. The timeline I'd been given about Ryan's relationship with Tessa was clearly false. This wasn't a woman he'd met recently after our divorce was finalized. Based on the social dynamics I'd photographed, they had been together for significantly longer, possibly even during the final years of our marriage. Which meant the theft of my jewelry had been planned and executed while I was still Ryan's wife, still trusting him with my most precious possessions, still believing our marriage was worth fighting for. I spent the rest of the night organizing the photographs and creating detailed notes about what I'd observed. By dawn, I had compiled a comprehensive documentation of the evidence I'd gathered, including timestamps, guest interactions, and detailed descriptions of each piece of stolen jewelry. But more than that, I had the beginning of a plan that would ensure the truth about Ryan's theft and the complicity of my supposed friends would finally come to light. The Sunday farewell brunch was scheduled to begin at 10, giving guests one final opportunity to celebrate Chloe and Marcus before everyone returned to their respective lives. As the photographer, I was expected to document these final moments of the wedding weekend, capturing the relaxed morning atmosphere and fond farewells. Instead, I was preparing to use the gathering for my own purposes, to begin the process of exposing the elaborate deception that had stolen both my family's legacy and years of my emotional well-being. I dressed carefully for the brunch, choosing a simple but elegant outfit that would allow me to move freely while maintaining the professional appearance expected of a wedding photographer. But hidden in my camera bag, alongside my usual equipment, was a printed copy of the police report from my stolen jewelry. insurance documentation showing the items that had been claimed as lost, and several enlarged photographs from the previous evening that clearly showed Tessa wearing my family's pieces. The hotel's Ocean View restaurant had been reserved for the private brunch, with round tables scattered throughout the space to accommodate the guests who had chosen to extend their celebration. Fresh flowers from the wedding decorated each table, and the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows created a warm, intimate atmosphere that should have been perfect for fond farewells and happy memories. Instead, as I entered the restaurant and saw Ryan and Tessa already seated with several other guests, still wearing pieces of my stolen jewelry as if they belonged to her, I felt the cold determination that had sustained me through my divorce proceedings settle into my chest. The time for subtle observation and careful documentation was ending. The time for confrontation and consequences was about to begin. I moved through the room with practiced professionalism, greeting guests and taking candid photographs while positioning myself for optimal coverage of what was about to unfold. Unlike the previous evening, when I had been shocked into passive observation, this morning I was prepared, focused, and ready to reclaim both my family's treasures and my own dignity from the people who had stolen them. The reckoning I had been building toward since the moment I first saw my grandmother's necklace around another woman's throat was finally about to begin. The morning breeze from Carmel Bay carried the scent of eucalyptus and salt air through the restaurant's open terrace doors as guests settled into their seats for what would be the final meal of Chloe's wedding celebration. I moved methodically through the room, my camera capturing seemingly innocent moments, while my mind calculated angles, timing, and the precise moment when I would reveal what I had discovered. Ryan and Tessa had chosen a table near the windows, the natural light illuminating Tessa's stolen jewelry with crystalline clarity. She was wearing different earrings today, simple pearl studs that I recognized as belonging to my mother's collection, but the emerald necklace remained around her throat like a declaration of ownership. The casual way she touched it while speaking, the unconscious gesture of someone completely comfortable with wearing another woman's inheritance, sent waves of fury through me that I channeled into steady hands and sharp focus. I had positioned myself at the coffee station when I overheard the conversation that would change everything. Tessa was speaking to Marcus's cousin about their upcoming trip to Europe, mentioning casually that they would be celebrating their 3rd anniversary in Paris next month. 3rd anniversary. The words hit me like ice water, confirming what I had begun to suspect but hadn't wanted to believe. Ryan and Tessa hadn't met after our divorce was finalized. They had been together since before our marriage ended, which meant their relationship had overlapped with ours by at least a year. The timeline clicked into place with devastating precision. 3 years ago, I had been struggling through the final months of my marriage, attending couples therapy sessions where Ryan claimed to be committed to working things out while secretly planning his exit strategy. I had been grieving our miscarriage, believing his assurances that we would try again when I was emotionally ready, while he was already building a life with someone else. Most sickeningly, I had been trusting him with my family's jewelry, occasionally asking him to retrieve pieces from our safety deposit box for special occasions, never imagining he was systematically stealing them to gift to his mistress. I discreetly photographed Tessa as she spoke, capturing not just the stolen jewelry but the confident way she discussed their relationship timeline. She had no idea she was providing evidence that would expose Ryan's infidelity, fraud, and theft in a single conversation. Her openness about their anniversary suggested she either didn't know I was nearby or didn't realize the significance of what she was revealing. Moving closer to their table under the pretense of taking photographs, I began to piece together more details about their relationship from overheard conversations. They were living together in a beachfront condo in La Jolla, which explained the expensive lifestyle Ryan seemed to be maintaining despite claiming financial difficulties during our divorce. Tessa worked in art curation for private collectors, a job that would have given her access to the kind of expertise needed to properly value and authenticate vintage jewelry. They were discussing plans to visit her family's estate in Napa Valley, suggesting she came from the kind of old money background that would make my stolen heirlooms seem like natural possessions, rather than suspicious acquisitions. But it was Derek's wife Maria who provided the most damaging piece of information. She congratulated Tessa on her engagement ring, asking to see it more closely and commenting on how beautiful the antique setting was. As Tessa extended her hand, I could see through my telephoto lens that she was wearing my polpiglet, great-grandmother's platinum and diamond ring, the one that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. The ring my mother had given me on my 18th birthday with the promise that I would one day pass it to my own daughter. The engagement ring meant Ryan hadn't just stolen my jewelry to sell or to give as gifts. He had taken the most precious pieces to build a completely fabricated history with another woman. Tessa wasn't just wearing stolen goods. She was wearing symbols of commitment that rightfully belonged to me and my family's legacy. She was building her future on the foundation of what had been stolen from my past. I excused myself from the brunch temporarily, claiming I needed to retrieve additional memory cards from my room. Instead, I used the privacy to make several important phone calls. The first was to Detective Sarah Martinez, who had investigated the original theft report 3 years earlier. The case had gone cold quickly due to lack of evidence, but I now had photographic proof of where the missing items had gone. Detective Martinez seemed genuinely shocked when I explained what I had discovered and immediately agreed to meet with me the following day to review my evidence. The second call was to my attorney, Janet Chen, who had represented me during my divorce proceedings. Janet had always suspected that Ryan was hiding assets and had been frustrated by our inability to prove his deception. When I described the jewelry situation and its implications for the financial settlement we had agreed to, she became extremely interested. If Ryan had committed fraud during our divorce proceedings, it could potentially invalidate portions of our agreement and open him to both criminal charges and civil liability. My final call was to my insurance company's fraud investigation department. The substantial payout I had received for my stolen jewelry had been based on Ryan's false police report and sworn statements about the theft. If I could prove he had orchestrated the entire incident, it would constitute insurance fraud on a scale that would attract serious federal attention. The investigator I spoke with immediately opened a new case file and requested that I send all my photographic evidence electronically as soon as possible. By the time I returned to the brunch, I was no longer just an angry ex-wife seeking justice for personal wrongs. I was the key witness in what would become a complex criminal investigation involving theft, fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. The casual wedding celebration continuing around me had become the scene where multiple felonies would be exposed and documented. I resumed my photography with renewed purpose, now focusing on capturing evidence that would stand up in court proceedings. Every interaction between Ryan and Tessa, every casual mention of their relationship timeline, every display of my stolen jewelry, became part of a growing legal case that would ultimately destroy the life they had built on deception and theft. Chloe approached me as I was photographing the dessert table, her expression carefully composed but her eyes betraying an anxiety that hadn't been present during the wedding ceremony. She had been watching my interactions with other guests, and I suspected she was beginning to realize that her careful orchestration of the weekend was unraveling in ways she hadn't anticipated. "How are you enjoying the brunch?" she asked, her tone artificially bright. "I hope you're getting some good final shots for the album." "The lighting is perfect," I replied, adjusting my camera settings while maintaining eye contact. "I've been able to capture some really interesting details that I think will be meaningful when you look back at these photos in the future." Something in my emphasis on the word details made her shift uncomfortably. "Natalie, about last night and your concerns about that necklace, I hope you're not still upset about that misunderstanding." "Actually, I've been thinking about it quite a bit," I said calmly. "It's amazing how clearly you can see things when you take time to really examine the evidence. Sometimes what looks like coincidence reveals itself to be something much more deliberate." Chloe's composure cracked slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "I mean that I've had some very interesting conversations this morning," I continued, keeping my voice low but steady. "About anniversary celebrations and engagement rings and relationship timelines that don't quite match the story I've been told for the past 3 years. Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Natalie, you're making something out of nothing. You're seeing connections that don't exist because you're still angry about the divorce." "Am I?" I asked, raising my camera and scrolling through some of the images I had captured. Because Detective Martinez seemed very interested when I called her this morning. Apparently, cases involving stolen jewelry don't just disappear when new evidence emerges. The threat was clear, and Chloe's reaction confirmed that she understood both the implications and her own vulnerability. She had been complicit in this deception from the beginning, possibly even helping to plan the theft or at minimum knowing about it and choosing to remain silent. Her position as my supposed best friend had given her access to information about my family's jewelry, my marriage problems, and my emotional state that could have been used to plan and execute the perfect crime. "You need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove," she said quietly, her wedding day persona completely abandoned. "Some things are better left in the past." "I couldn't agree more," I replied. Unfortunately, when the past is wearing my grandmother's necklace at my best friend's wedding, it becomes very much a present-day concern. Chloe glanced around the restaurant, clearly calculating whether anyone else could hear our conversation. The other guests were focused on their own conversations and farewell preparations, giving us a privacy that felt increasingly tense and dangerous. "What do you want?" she asked finally, the question confirming her guilt more effectively than any confession could have. "I want my family's jewelry returned," I said simply. "I want the truth about what really happened 3 years ago. And I want to understand how my best friend could watch me suffer over losing those precious heirlooms while knowing exactly where they were." "It's not that simple," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand the whole situation." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Explain how stealing irreplaceable family treasures was justified. Explain how watching me grieve for pieces of my grandmother's memory was acceptable. Explain how participating in insurance fraud and filing false police reports was somehow the right thing to do." Before she could respond, Marcus appeared at our table, smiling warmly and completely oblivious to the tension crackling between his new wife and me. "Ladies, I hope you're not talking business on our farewell morning," he said cheerfully. "Natalie, Chloe has been raving about your work all weekend. I can't wait to see the finished photographs." "I think you'll find them very revealing," I replied, managing a smile that I hoped looked more genuine than it felt. "I've captured some moments that I'm sure will be memorable for years to come." Marcus beamed with happiness while Chloe looked like she might be sick. The contrast between his innocent joy and her growing panic would have been amusing if the situation weren't so serious. I found myself wondering what kind of man Marcus really was, whether he was truly as honorable as he appeared, or if he was simply better at hiding his complicity in whatever scheme had brought us to this point. As the brunch continued around us, I noticed other subtle signs that the weekend's carefully controlled narrative was beginning to fracture. Derek kept glancing nervously in my direction, his earlier panic about the insurance settlement clearly still weighing on his mind. Maria seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, chatting happily about Tessa's beautiful jewelry and their upcoming European vacation. Ryan appeared relaxed on the surface, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The way he checked his phone repeatedly, the sharp glances he directed toward Chloe when he thought no one was watching. The group dynamics that had seemed so natural the night before now revealed themselves as a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to keep me from discovering what I had already found. The college friends who had greeted me with awkward expressions weren't uncomfortable because of my divorce. They were uncomfortable because they knew I was being deceived. The careful seating arrangements and strategic conversations weren't coincidental. They were defensive measures designed to prevent exactly the kind of discovery I had made. I continued photographing throughout the remainder of the brunch, but my focus had shifted from documenting a celebration to gathering evidence for what would become a complex legal battle. Every image of Tessa wearing my stolen jewelry, every conversation about their relationship timeline, every interaction that revealed the scope of the conspiracy became part of a growing case file that would ultimately expose years of deception and theft. As guests began to make their departure preparations, exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch, I found myself observing the social rituals with new cynicism. How many of these warm farewells were genuine, and how many were performed by people who had been complicit in betraying me? How many of these promises to visit and maintain friendships were sincere, and how many were simply part of maintaining the facade that had hidden criminal activity for 3 years? Ryan and Tessa were among the first to leave, and I made sure to capture their final moments at the celebration. As they gathered their belongings and said goodbye to other guests, I could see Ryan scanning the room with what appeared to be increasing anxiety. He was looking for me, trying to gauge whether I had recognized the jewelry or understood its significance. When our eyes met across the restaurant, I gave him a calm smile and raised my camera in a small salute, a gesture that clearly rattled him more than any dramatic confrontation could have. Tessa remained oblivious to the undercurrents, graciously accepting compliments on her jewelry and promising to send recipes from their upcoming European cooking classes. Her innocence in the moment was almost tragic. She had no idea that the beautiful antique pieces she wore so proudly were about to become evidence in a criminal investigation that would destroy the life she had built with Ryan. As they walked toward the restaurant exit, I overheard Tessa comment to another guest that she was so grateful to have found someone who appreciated her love of vintage jewelry and family heirlooms. The irony was staggering. She genuinely believed these pieces were gifts from someone who shared her aesthetic sensibilities, not stolen goods from a systematic campaign of theft and fraud. She had been victimized by Ryan's deception almost as much as I had, though she would likely face criminal charges as an accessory once the truth emerged. After their departure, the remaining guests gradually filtered out, leaving Chloe, Marcus, and me to handle the final details of settling accounts with the hotel and arranging for leftover flowers and decorations to be disposed of or donated. The mundane tasks provided a strange counterpoint to the explosive revelations of the past 24 hours, as if the ordinary world was continuing to function despite the fact that my understanding of the past 3 years had been completely overturned. Chloe maintained her composure throughout these final interactions, but I could see the strain in her forced smiles and careful movements. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for me to make my accusations public or to take some dramatic action that would expose her role in the deception. Instead, I continued with my professional obligations, packing my camera equipment and preparing my final invoices as if nothing had changed. It was only when Marcus excused himself to handle the checkout process that Chloe and I were left alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the detritus of her perfect wedding celebration. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations, and the weight of a friendship that had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice small and uncertain. "Now I go home and develop these photographs," I replied calmly. "I think you'll be surprised by what they reveal when examined closely." "Natalie, please," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I trusted you," I said quietly, "when my marriage was falling apart, when I was grieving our lost baby, when I was devastated about losing my grandmother's jewelry. I trusted you to be my friend. I trusted you to support me and tell me the truth, and help me heal from what I thought was the worst betrayal of my life." Tears began to form in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy for her distress. She had earned whatever consequences were coming through her own choices and actions. "But you weren't my friend," I continued. "You were part of the conspiracy that destroyed my marriage and stole my family's legacy. You watched me suffer and offered comfort while knowing you were one of the people responsible for my pain." "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she whispered. "It got out of hand, and by the time I realized how wrong it was too late to fix it." "It's never too late to tell the truth," I said, standing to gather my belongings. "But that's a choice you'll have to make for yourself." I left her sitting alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life, but would instead be remembered as the day when years of deception finally began to unravel. As I walked through the hotel lobby toward my car, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The truth was finally emerging, and justice would eventually be served, but the cost had been the destruction of relationships I had once treasured and believed to be genuine. The drive back to Portland gave me hours to process everything I had discovered and plan my next steps. The evidence I had gathered was substantial, but building a criminal case would require careful coordination with law enforcement and legal professionals. More immediately, I needed to prepare for the personal and professional fallout that would inevitably follow when the truth became public. By the time I reached home, I had made my decision. The confrontation phase of this discovery was over. Now it was time for action, for consequences, and for the kind of justice that could only come through the legal system rather than personal revenge. Ryan, Tessa, Chloe, and everyone else who had participated in this elaborate deception were about to discover that some betrayals carry costs that compound over time, and that the truth has a way of emerging exactly when it can do the most damage to those who have tried to hide it. Monday morning dawned gray and misty in Portland, the Pacific Northwest weather, a stark contrast to the California sunshine I had left behind just 12 hours earlier. My apartment felt smaller than usual, cluttered with the weight of revelations that had transformed everything I thought I knew about my past 3 years. I spread my camera equipment across my dining room table, connecting multiple memory cards to my laptop and beginning the methodical process of organizing evidence that would bring down the people who had betrayed me. The photographs told a story more damning than anything I could have imagined when I first agreed to document Chloe's wedding. Every image of Tessa wearing my stolen jewelry was a separate count of receiving stolen property. Every casual conversation about their relationship timeline was evidence of perjury in divorce proceedings. Every interaction with guests who clearly knew about their long-term relationship was proof of conspiracy to commit fraud. I had inadvertently created one of the most comprehensive documentation packages in the history of white-collar crime investigations. Detective Martinez arrived at my apartment precisely at 9 o'clock, accompanied by FBI agent Rebecca Torres, whose presence indicated that my case had already escalated beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. Agent Torres specialized in multi-state fraud investigations, and the interstate nature of Ryan's business dealings combined with the insurance fraud component had triggered federal interest within hours of my initial report. Ms. Brooks, I want you to understand that what you've brought us goes far beyond simple theft, Agent Torres began as we settled around my dining room table. Based on the preliminary information you've provided, we're looking at organized fraud, money laundering, and potentially racketeering charges depending on how extensive this conspiracy proves to be. Detective Martinez opened her laptop and pulled up the original case file from 3 years ago. I remember this investigation clearly because the lack of evidence bothered me at the time. No signs of forced entry to the safety deposit box, no witnesses, no surveillance footage that showed anything suspicious. Your ex-husband's story was clean, maybe too clean. I walked them through my photographic evidence systematically, starting with the wide shots that established the wedding venue and participants, then focusing on the specific images that showed Tessa wearing each piece of stolen jewelry. Agent Torres took detailed notes while Detective Martinez enhanced the photos on her laptop, zooming in to capture the distinctive characteristics that proved these were the same pieces listed in the original theft report. This emerald necklace, Detective Martinez said, pointing to a close-up shot of Tessa during the reception. The insurance photographs from your original claim show that same distinctive setting, down to the tiny chip in the gold filigree on the left side. There's no question this is the same piece. Agent Torres was more interested in the timeline evidence. You mentioned overhearing a conversation about their 3rd anniversary. Can you walk me through exactly what was said and who heard it? I provided a detailed account of the brunch conversation, including the names of witnesses who could corroborate Tessa's casual mention of their relationship duration. Agent Torres made notes about each potential witness, already building the framework for what would become an extensive interview process. The engagement ring is particularly significant, she continued, examining a photograph that showed Tessa's left hand clearly. If this was your family heirloom and he used it to propose to another woman while still married to you, that establishes both the timing of the affair and his intent to permanently deprive you of the property. It transforms this from theft to aggravated theft, with sentimental value enhancement. The legal terminology was complex, but the implications were clear. Ryan hadn't just stolen my jewelry, he had used my most precious family heirloom to build a fraudulent relationship, while simultaneously destroying my marriage and stealing my inheritance. The calculated nature of his actions elevated the charges significantly beyond simple theft. Detective Martinez reviewed the insurance claim documentation I had preserved from the original investigation. The payout was substantial, nearly $200,000 for the full collection. That level of insurance fraud carries mandatory federal penalties, especially when combined with the false police reports and sworn statements your ex-husband provided. What about the other people involved? I asked, thinking about Chloe's obvious knowledge and Derek's guilty reaction to my questions about the insurance settlement. Agent Torres exchanged a meaningful look with Detective Martinez. Based on what you've described, we'll need to investigate each person who appears to have had knowledge of the theft and failed to report it. Conspiracy charges can apply to anyone who knowingly participated in or concealed the criminal activity. The scope of the investigation was staggering. What had started as my personal quest for justice was becoming a federal case that would ultimately involve dozens of people and span multiple states. Ryan's carefully constructed new life was about to become the subject of intense scrutiny that would expose every lie he had told and every law he had broken in the process. After the investigators left with copies of all my evidence, I called my attorney Janet Chen to discuss the civil implications of what had been discovered. Janet's excitement was palpable even through the phone. This was the kind of case that could invalidate our entire divorce settlement and open Ryan to massive financial liability. If we can prove he was hiding assets and committing fraud during the divorce proceedings, we can petition the court to reopen the settlement, Janet explained. Given the evidence you've gathered, I'm confident we can demonstrate that the original agreement was based on fraudulent representations and hidden information. The financial implications were significant, beyond just recovering my stolen jewelry. If Ryan had been concealing income and assets during our divorce, I might be entitled to a completely different settlement that could include his business interests, real estate investments, and other holdings he had successfully hidden 3 years ago. But more importantly, Janet continued, if he's convicted of the criminal charges, he'll likely face asset forfeiture proceedings that could liquidate everything he owns to pay restitution. You would be the primary victim in those proceedings, which means you'd have first claim on recovered assets. The conversation with Janet clarified something important. This wasn't just about recovering my grandmother's necklace anymore. Ryan's criminal activity had created a web of financial fraud that extended far beyond the theft of my jewelry. The systematic way he had hidden assets, committed perjury, and manipulated legal proceedings suggested a pattern of behavior that could invalidate every financial transaction he had made during and after our marriage. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Marcus Webb. His voice was strained and formal, completely different from the happy groom I had photographed just 2 days earlier. "Natalie, I need to speak with you about something urgent," he began without preamble. "Chloe told me about your conversation at the brunch, and I think there are things you need to know that might change your perspective on the situation." I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, curious about what information he might have that could possibly justify the betrayal I had discovered. When I arrived, Marcus was already waiting in a corner booth, looking haggard and significantly older than he had appeared during the wedding celebration. "First, I want you to know that I had no knowledge of any of this until Chloe confessed everything to me yesterday," he began immediately. "If I had known what she was involved in, I would never have allowed it to continue." His sincerity seemed genuine, but I remained skeptical. "What exactly did she confess to you?" Marcus took a deep breath before launching into a story that was even more complicated than I had imagined. According to his account, Chloe's involvement had begun innocently enough. Ryan had approached her during the early stages of our marriage troubles, claiming he needed someone to talk to about our relationship problems. Chloe, believing she was helping both of us by being a supportive friend to Ryan, had shared information about my emotional state, my family history, and my attachment to my grandmother's jewelry. "She thought she was being a good friend to both of you," Marcus continued. Ryan presented himself as a husband who was trying to understand his wife better, who wanted to surprise you with thoughtful gestures that showed he appreciated your family traditions. But Ryan's requests for information had gradually become more specific and troubling. He had asked detailed questions about the jewelry pieces, their history, and their location. He had inquired about your daily routines, when you typically access the safety deposit box, and how you would likely react to their loss. By the time Chloe realized she was providing information that was being used for criminal purposes, she was already too deeply involved to extract herself without facing serious consequences. "The theft happened exactly as Ryan planned it," Marcus said, his voice heavy with disgust. "He used Chloe's information to time everything perfectly, taking the jewelry when he knew you wouldn't discover the loss immediately. Then he used her continued friendship with you to monitor your emotional state and ensure his story remained consistent. The manipulation was more sophisticated than I had realized. Ryan hadn't just stolen my jewelry, he had weaponized my closest friendship to facilitate the theft and cover up his tracks afterward. Chloe's support during my grief over the lost pieces had been genuine, but it had also served Ryan's purposes by keeping her close enough to monitor any developments that might threaten his scheme. Why didn't she come forward when she realized what was happening? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus's expression darkened, because Ryan made it clear that she would face criminal charges as an accessory if the truth came out. He had emails and text messages where she had provided information about your routines and the jewelry. He convinced her that her only choice was to remain silent and help maintain the cover-up. The picture Marcus painted was of a woman who had been gradually manipulated into criminal complicity, then blackmailed into continued silence through fear of prosecution. It didn't excuse Chloe's actions, but it provided context that made her behavior more understandable if not forgivable. She's been living with the guilt for 3 years, Marcus continued. It's affected every aspect of her life, including our relationship. She almost called off our engagement twice because she felt like she didn't deserve to be happy while you were still suffering from something she had helped cause. I studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What I saw instead was a man who was genuinely struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the criminal activity she had participated in. His pain seemed authentic, and his willingness to potentially damage his new marriage by revealing these details suggested he was telling the truth. "What does she want from me now?" I asked directly. "She wants to cooperate with the investigation," Marcus replied immediately. "She has kept copies of all her communications with Ryan, including messages that show how he manipulated her into providing information, and then threatened her to maintain her silence. She's willing to testify against him if it will help bring him to justice." The offer was tempting from a strategic standpoint. Chloe's cooperation could provide crucial evidence about Ryan's planning and execution of the theft, as well as his subsequent efforts to conceal his crimes. Her testimony could transform the case from one based solely on circumstantial evidence to one supported by direct witness accounts of criminal conspiracy. But accepting her cooperation would also mean potentially reducing her own criminal liability in exchange for her testimony against Ryan. I wasn't sure I was emotionally prepared to extend that kind of mercy to someone who had betrayed our friendship so completely, regardless of the circumstances that had led to her involvement. "I need time to think about this," I told Marcus honestly. "This isn't just about building a criminal case anymore. This is about confronting the fact that the person I trusted most in the world helped orchestrate the worst betrayal of my life." Marcus nodded understandingly. "I know it's a lot to process, but I want you to know that Chloe's remorse is genuine, and she's committed to making this right however she can." After Marcus left, I remained in the coffee shop for another hour, trying to process the new information he had provided. The story he told made Chloe's actions more understandable but not more forgivable. She had been manipulated by Ryan, but she had also made a series of choices that had prioritized her own protection over my welfare. Even if her initial involvement had been innocent, her decision to remain silent for 3 years while watching me suffer had been purely selfish. The evening brought another unexpected development when my phone rang with a call from an unknown California number. When I answered, I was surprised to hear Tessa Morgan's voice on the other end. "Ms. Brooks, I hope you don't mind me calling," she began nervously. "I got your number from the wedding photographer contact information. I need to speak with you about something urgent." The conversation that followed was surreal in its civility. Tessa had been contacted by Agent Torres that afternoon and informed that the jewelry she had been wearing was suspected stolen property. The federal investigators had been direct about the criminal implications of her possession of the pieces, and she was facing potential charges for receiving stolen goods, unless she could demonstrate her ignorance of their origin. "I had no idea," she said, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine distress. "Ryan told me these pieces had been in his family for generations. He gave me detailed stories about each one, about the women who had worn them, and the occasions they had celebrated. I cherished them because I thought they connected me to his family history. The manipulation of Tessa had been as complete as the manipulation of Chloe and me. Ryan had created an entirely fictional narrative about the jewelry's provenance, giving Tessa emotional connections to pieces that were actually my family's heritage. She had worn my grandmother's necklace believing it had belonged to Ryan's grandmother, had accepted my great-grandmother's engagement ring thinking it represented Ryan's family tradition of enduring love. "I want to return everything immediately," Tessa continued. "I don't want to keep anything that doesn't rightfully belong to me. But the investigators said I need to coordinate with you about the recovery process." Her willingness to cooperate was encouraging, but it also raised new questions about Ryan's plans for the future. If he had been living with Tessa for 3 years and planning to marry her using my stolen engagement ring, what had he intended to do if she ever learned the truth about the jewelry's origin? Had he planned to maintain the deception indefinitely, or was there some exit strategy that would have protected him if his lies were discovered? The call with Tessa lasted nearly an hour, and by its end, I had a clearer picture of how Ryan had manipulated multiple women to achieve his goals. He had used my trust to gain access to the jewelry, Chloe's friendship to plan and execute the theft, and Tessa's innocence to give the stolen pieces a new identity. Each of us had been a tool in his elaborate scheme, valued only for what we could provide to advance his agenda. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of the most complex betrayal I could have imagined, trying to decide how to proceed with the knowledge I had gained. The criminal investigation would continue regardless of my personal feelings, but I still had choices to make about cooperation with former friends and the extent to which I was willing to seek maximum consequences for everyone involved. The Ryan Carter one had married no longer existed, if he ever had. The man I was now pursuing through federal criminal charges was a sophisticated fraudster who had built his entire post-divorce life on stolen goods and fabricated stories. But more than that, he was someone who had systematically destroyed the trust and emotional security of multiple women to serve his own interests. As I prepared for bed, I made a decision that felt right, despite its complexity. I would cooperate with both Chloe and Tessa's offers to assist the investigation, not because I forgave them for their roles in my betrayal, but because ensuring Ryan faced the full consequences of his actions was more important than my personal feelings about their complicity. The manipulation they had experienced didn't excuse their choices, but it did help me understand that Ryan was the primary architect of this elaborate deception. The federal investigation was moving forward with or without my emotional resolution about the people involved. What mattered now was ensuring that justice was served and that Ryan's pattern of manipulation and fraud was exposed completely enough to prevent him from victimizing anyone else in the future. Whatever personal healing I needed to do about the betrayals I had experienced could wait until after the legal process had run its course and the full truth had been revealed. Tomorrow would bring new developments in what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant white-collar crime cases the federal district had seen in years. And at the center of it all was my grandmother's emerald necklace, the stolen heirloom that had inadvertently exposed a web of deception spanning multiple years and destroying multiple lives in service of one man's greed and selfishness. 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in San Diego, watching Ryan Carter being led away in handcuffs after receiving his sentence of 8 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The man who had once charmed me into marriage with his easy confidence and practiced smile now looked hollow and defeated, his expensive suit replaced by orange prison attire. As the bailiff escorted him through the door that would close on his freedom for nearly a decade, I felt not triumph, but a profound sense of closure that had been years in the making. The investigation that began with my photograph of a stolen necklace at a wedding had ultimately exposed a criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. Ryan hadn't just stolen my jewelry and defrauded insurance companies. He had been operating a sophisticated scheme that involved multiple victims, fake identities, and financial crimes across several states. The federal prosecutors had built a case so comprehensive that Ryan's defense attorney had advised him to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a trial that could have resulted in decades behind bars. Agent Torres found me in the courthouse hallway after the sentencing, her expression reflecting the satisfaction of a law enforcement professional who had seen justice served in a particularly complex case. The investigation had consumed 6 months of intensive work, involving financial audits, witness interviews, and forensic analysis that had revealed the full scope of Ryan's criminal activities. The asset forfeiture proceedings will begin next week, she informed me. Based on the court's findings, you'll be entitled to full restitution for the stolen jewelry, plus damages for the emotional distress and financial losses you suffered. The preliminary estimates suggest you'll recover significantly more than the original insurance payout. The financial recovery was meaningful, but it paled in comparison to the satisfaction of knowing that Ryan would face real consequences for his actions. More importantly, the investigation had exposed his pattern of manipulation and fraud so thoroughly that he would never again be able to victimize women the way he had victimized me, Chloe, and Tessa. Tessa had been waiting outside the courthouse when I arrived that morning, and we had shared a brief but significant conversation about the journey that had brought us both to this moment. She had cooperated fully with the investigation, turning over all the stolen jewelry and providing detailed testimony about Ryan's deception. Her innocence in the original crimes had been conclusively established, and she had escaped criminal charges while gaining her own form of closure about the relationship that had been built on lies. "I keep thinking about all the stories he told me about those pieces," she had said, fingering the spot where my grandmother's necklace had once rested against her throat. "The detailed histories he created, the emotional connections he fabricated. I genuinely loved that jewelry because I thought it represented his family's legacy and our shared future." Her experience had been a crucial part of the prosecution's case, demonstrating the sophisticated nature of Ryan's manipulation and the elaborate fictional narratives he had created to support his theft. She had worn my family's jewelry for 3 years, believing she was honoring Ryan's grandmother's memory, when in reality she was displaying the fruits of his systematic betrayal of our marriage. Chloe had also testified for the prosecution, though her cooperation had come at a personal cost that was still unfolding months later. Her marriage to Marcus had survived the revelation of her involvement, but it would take years to rebuild the trust that had been damaged by her deception. She had provided crucial evidence about Ryan's planning and manipulation, including recorded phone calls where he had threatened her with prosecution if she revealed his scheme. Her testimony had been particularly damaging to Ryan's defense because it established his intent and premeditation so clearly. The conversations she had documented showed him methodically gathering information about my routines, my emotional vulnerabilities, and my family's jewelry over a period of months before executing the theft. Her cooperation had transformed what might have been a case based on circumstantial evidence into one supported by direct witness accounts of criminal conspiracy. But perhaps most significantly, her testimony had revealed that I hadn't been Ryan's only victim. During their conversations, he had casually mentioned other women he had manipulated in similar ways, other relationships he had exploited for financial gain. This information had prompted the FBI to investigate additional cases, ultimately leading to federal charges that reflected a pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. The ripple effects of the investigation had extended far beyond Ryan's immediate crimes. Derek Stone, Ryan's business partner, had been charged with conspiracy and money laundering for his role in hiding assets during my divorce proceedings. His involvement had been more extensive than I had realized, including the creation of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to conceal Ryan's true financial position. Derek was facing his own federal charges and would likely serve substantial prison time for his participation in the scheme. Several other college friends who had known about Ryan's relationship with Tessa during our marriage had also faced questioning about their failure to report the adultery that had affected our divorce settlement. While most had escaped criminal charges, the social consequences within our former circle had been severe. The tight-knit group that had once seemed so supportive had fractured completely, with longtime friendships ending over questions of loyalty and complicity. The media attention surrounding the case had been significant but manageable. The story of a wedding photographer who had exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme through wedding photos had captured public imagination, leading to interviews and articles that had ultimately boosted my business. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan's betrayal had ultimately made me more successful than I had ever been during our marriage. My photography business had thrived during the investigation, as the publicity had attracted clients who appreciated my attention to detail and my ability to capture meaningful moments. The skills I had developed in documenting evidence for the federal case had translated into a heightened awareness of emotional subtleties and relationship dynamics that made my wedding photography more compelling and authentic. More importantly, the experience had fundamentally changed my approach to personal relationships. The manipulation I had experienced from Ryan, and to a lesser extent from Chloe, had taught me to trust my instincts about people, and to pay attention to the small inconsistencies that often reveal larger deceptions. I had learned to value transparency and direct communication over the polished charm that had once attracted me to Ryan. The therapy I had undergone during the investigation had helped me process not just the recent betrayals, but the underlying patterns that had made me vulnerable to manipulation in the first place. Dr. Sarah Kim, my therapist, had helped me understand how my childhood experiences with an alcoholic father had created a tendency to excuse problematic behavior in people I cared about, making me an ideal target for someone like Ryan who was skilled at exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. You weren't naive or stupid, Dr. Kim had explained during one of our sessions. You were generous with your trust in a way that reflected your fundamental decency. The fact that someone exploited that generosity says nothing about your worth as a person and everything about their character. This perspective had been crucial in helping me move forward, without the self-blame that might otherwise have paralyzed my ability to form new relationships. I had learned to distinguish between healthy skepticism and destructive cynicism, maintaining my capacity for love and friendship while developing better boundaries and warning systems. The return of my family's jewelry had been an emotional experience that I hadn't fully anticipated. When Agent Torres had personally delivered the recovered pieces to my apartment, I had been overwhelmed by the flood of memories and emotions they triggered. Holding my grandmother's necklace again, feeling its familiar weight, and examining the intricate craftsmanship that had survived 4 generations, had connected me to my family's history in a way that felt almost spiritual. Each piece had been forensically examined and photographed as evidence, but they had been carefully preserved and were returned in perfect condition. The emerald necklace showed no signs of the years it had spent around another woman's throat. The Art Deco bracelet still caught light in the same distinctive pattern I remembered from childhood. My great-grandmother's engagement ring still carried the subtle imperfections that made it unique and irreplaceable. But beyond their material return, having the jewelry back had restored something intangible that I hadn't realized I had lost. These pieces represented continuity with women I had never met, but whose strength and resilience had shaped my own identity. Wearing them now felt like reclaiming not just family treasures but my own sense of belonging to something larger than myself. I had also inherited Ryan's collection of fabricated stories about the jewelry's history, the elaborate fictional narratives he had created to give Tessa emotional connections to the stolen pieces. In a strange way, his lies had revealed the power of these family heirlooms to carry meaning and create bonds across generations, even when those bonds were artificially constructed. The experience had led me to research my family's history more thoroughly than I ever had before, seeking out the real stories behind each piece of jewelry and the women who had worn them. What I discovered was even more remarkable than Ryan's inventions: tales of immigration and courage, of love preserved through war and hardship, of women who had passed down not just jewelry but strength and resilience through generations of challenges. My great-great-grandmother had indeed worn the emerald necklace when her husband left for war, but she had also worn it to her naturalization ceremony when she became an American citizen, and to the opening of the school she had founded for immigrant children in Boston. My great-grandmother had carried the Art Deco bracelet hidden in her coat during her family's flight from Hungary, but she had also worn it proudly to her daughter's graduation from medical school, the first woman in the family to receive a professional degree. These real stories had given the jewelry even deeper meaning than it had possessed before Ryan's theft. Each piece now represented not just family history but the resilience to overcome betrayal and loss, the strength to rebuild after devastation, and the courage to trust again after being deceived. The legal resolution of Ryan's case had also brought unexpected closure to aspects of my divorce that I had thought were permanently settled. The court had invalidated significant portions of our divorce agreement based on the evidence of hidden assets and fraudulent representations, resulting in additional financial recovery that reflected the true value of what I had lost when our marriage ended. More significantly, the investigation had revealed that Ryan's financial difficulties during our divorce had been largely fabricated. The startup failures and investment losses he had claimed were real, but he had hidden substantial assets in offshore accounts and shell companies that had allowed him to maintain his lifestyle while claiming poverty in divorce proceedings. The sophisticated nature of his financial deception had required the assistance of professionals, including accountants and attorneys who were now facing their own legal consequences. Janet Chen, my divorce attorney, had been vindicated in her suspicions about Ryan's hidden assets, and she had used the federal investigation's findings to pursue additional claims that had resulted in substantial recovery beyond the criminal restitution. The combination of asset forfeiture, civil judgments, and invalidated settlement terms had ultimately made me financially better off than I would have been if Ryan had been honest during our original divorce proceedings. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the entire experience had been the personal growth and self-discovery that had emerged from confronting such comprehensive betrayal. The woman who had walked into Chloe's wedding 6 months earlier, still carrying emotional scars from a divorce she hadn't fully understood, bore little resemblance to the woman who now stood outside the federal courthouse, watching her ex-husband begin his prison sentence. I had learned to trust my instincts about people and situations, to pay attention to the small inconsistencies that often reveal larger problems, and to value authenticity over charm in my personal relationships. The experience had taught me that surviving betrayal wasn't just about seeking justice or recovering losses. It was about using the knowledge gained through pain to build a stronger, more authentic life. The months following Ryan's sentencing brought a series of positive developments that felt like the universe correcting itself after years of imbalance. My photography business continued to grow, attracting clients who valued my ability to capture genuine emotion and authentic moments. The skills I had developed in reading people and situations during the investigation had made me better at my craft, allowing me to anticipate and document the meaningful exchanges that made each wedding unique. I had also begun dating again, approaching new relationships with a combination of openness and wisdom that I hadn't possessed during my marriage to Ryan. The experience of being systematically deceived had taught me to recognize the difference between genuine connection and manipulative charm, between authentic vulnerability and calculated performance. Dr. Kim had helped me understand that the goal wasn't to become cynical or closed off, but to maintain my capacity for love while developing better judgment about who deserved my trust. The man I was currently seeing, David Chen, was a literature professor at Portland State University who had been introduced to me by mutual friends. His approach to relationships was characterized by the same thoughtfulness and authenticity that he brought to his academic work, and our connection had developed slowly and honestly, without the artificial intensity that had characterized my relationship with Ryan. David knew the full story of my experience with Ryan and the federal investigation, and his response had been one of admiration for my strength rather than concern about the drama I had survived. His perspective as someone who studied human nature through literature had given him insight into the patterns of manipulation and deception that had shaped my recent past, and he had been supportive without being patronizing as I continued to process the experience. The relationship was still new and developing, but it represented the possibility of building something genuine and lasting with someone who valued honesty and transparency. Unlike my marriage to Ryan, which had been based on projection and fantasy, my relationship with David was grounded in mutual understanding of who we actually were, rather than who we might pretend to be. Chloe and I had eventually found a way to maintain a limited friendship, though it would never again have the depth and trust that had characterized our college relationship. Her cooperation with the investigation had been crucial to achieving justice, and her genuine remorse about her role in my betrayal had been evident throughout the legal proceedings. But the damage to our friendship had been too extensive to fully repair, and we both understood that some betrayals change relationships permanently, even when they're ultimately forgiven. Marcus had proven to be a man of genuine integrity, who had supported Chloe through the consequences of her involvement, while also ensuring that justice was served. Their marriage had survived the revelation, but it had required extensive counseling and a complete rebuilding of trust that was still ongoing. In some ways, Chloe's experience had paralleled my own. Both of us had learned hard lessons about the cost of deception and the value of authenticity in relationships. Tessa had moved back to her family's home in Napa Valley after Ryan's arrest, using the time to process her own experience of being manipulated and deceived. We had maintained occasional contact throughout the investigation and its aftermath, bonded by our shared experience of having our trust exploited by the same man. Her recovery from the relationship had been complicated by the genuine feelings she had developed for someone who had never really existed, but she had shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding her sense of self-worth and judgment. The broader social circle that had once connected all of us had largely dissolved in the aftermath of the investigation. The revelation that so many people had known about Ryan's deception and chosen to remain silent had shattered the trust that held the group together. Some relationships had survived, But the easy intimacy and assumed loyalty that had once characterized our college friendships had been permanently altered by the discovery of how many people had prioritized their own comfort over truth and justice. Derek Stone had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for his role in the financial crimes, and his family had relocated to another state to escape the social consequences of his conviction. His wife Maria, who had genuinely been unaware of his criminal activities, had filed for divorce and was rebuilding her life as a single mother. The destruction of Derek's family had been collateral damage from Ryan's schemes, and it served as a reminder that white-collar crimes create ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate victims. 1 year after Ryan's sentencing, I returned to the Grand Pacific Hotel in Monterey for another wedding, this time as a guest rather than the photographer. My college friend Jennifer was marrying her longtime partner Sarah in a ceremony that emphasized authenticity and genuine celebration over social performance. The contrast with Chloe's wedding was striking, where that celebration had been built on hidden deceptions and careful orchestration. This one felt completely honest and joyful. Standing on the same terrace where I had first spotted my stolen jewelry around another woman's throat, I felt a profound sense of completion. The view of Carmel Bay was as beautiful as ever, but it no longer carried the weight of betrayal and loss that had made my previous visit so painful. Instead, it represented possibility and renewal, a reminder that even the most devastating betrayals could ultimately lead to growth and positive change. My grandmother's emerald necklace rested against my throat as I watched Jennifer and Sarah exchange vows, its weight familiar and comforting after the years it had spent away from my family. I had worn it to the wedding not as a display of recovery, but as a connection to the strength and resilience that my grandmother and her mother and grandmother had passed down through generations of challenges and triumphs. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity and authenticity. Jennifer and Sarah spoke their vows with the kind of genuine emotion that could never be faked or manipulated, their love evident in every word and gesture. Watching them promise to build a life together based on honesty and mutual support, I felt hopeful about my own future and the possibility of finding that kind of authentic partnership. During the reception, I found myself thinking about the different paths that had led various people to this moment. Jennifer and Sarah had built their relationship slowly and honestly, taking time to truly know each other before making permanent commitments. Their approach to love stood in stark contrast to the rush and intensity that had characterized my relationship with Ryan, and it reminded me of the value of patience and authenticity in building lasting connections. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their farewells, I realized that my experience with Ryan's betrayal had ultimately given me something valuable: the ability to recognize and appreciate genuine love when I encountered it. The pain of being deceived so completely had sharpened my perception of authenticity, making me more capable of building meaningful relationships based on truth rather than illusion. The drive back to Portland that night felt like a completion of the journey that had begun when I first agreed to photograph Chloe's wedding. What had started as a simple favor for a friend had become a catalyst for the most significant personal growth and legal victory of my life. The woman who had walked into that celebration carrying unresolved grief and hidden vulnerability had been replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of protecting herself while remaining open to genuine love. Ryan Carter was serving his sentence in a federal prison in Nevada, and according to the Bureau of Prisons website, he wouldn't be eligible for parole for another 6 years. The man who had once seemed so charming and sophisticated was now learning to navigate an environment where manipulation and deception carried immediate and severe consequences. His appeal had been denied, and his former life of comfort and privilege had been permanently replaced by the reality of his choices. But his downfall, satisfying as it was, had never been the real victory in this story. The real victory had been the recovery of my family's jewelry, the vindication of my instincts about his deception, and most importantly, the personal growth that had emerged from confronting and overcoming such comprehensive betrayal. I had learned that strength wasn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing how to respond when pain was inevitable. The jewelry that Ryan had stolen was now safely secured in a safety deposit box that only I had access to, but I wore pieces regularly as reminders of both my family's legacy and my own resilience. Each time I fastened my grandmother's necklace or slipped on my great-grandmother's bracelet, I felt connected not just to the women who had worn them before me, but to my own journey from victim to survivor, to someone who had found justice and healing. As I settled into my apartment that night, surrounded by the photographs and memories of a life rebuilt from devastation, I felt grateful for the unexpected path that had led me to this place of strength and authenticity. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of my story had instead become the beginning of a better chapter, one written with wisdom earned through experience and trust rebuilt on solid foundations. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that felt genuine rather than fantasized, grounded in reality rather than projection. Whatever came next, I would face it with the confidence of someone who had survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable of love than ever before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.